Good evening and welcome everyone. This is a League of Women Voters of the Ripon area, our first program of our calendar, our program year, and we are pleased to have Senator Joan Ballweg with us to give us an update on the state of the state. Both Alex Dahlman and John Plummer were invited and for varying reasons were not able to attend, so we really appreciate the Senator going solo for us. And when she's finished, we'll take questions from the audience. So please write them down on a card, and Andy will collect them. Just put them up when you're ready, and he'll come get them. So thank you, Senator, for joining us.
Very good. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to visit with folks. I understand that I think it's online. It's somehow or some way, but everything nowadays is all recorded in digital in some way. So, given the information that I was shared with me about a little bit about what you might want to have as a background, everyone should have a handout that we put together that I think is a little bit of what is going on. For anyone who don't know, I'm the state senator for the 14th district. I live in Marquezan over in Green Lake County. Been there for nearly 47 years now. Before that, I was the state representative, which covered Ripon also. This year, again, as a member of the Senate, I was appointed the chair of the Agriculture and Tourism Committee. That's one committee. There aren't a lot of senators, and there's a lot of topics. So this happens to be the one that got combined, and I think it's perfect for the 14th Senate District because that is what we have here, is agriculture and tourism. I also serve on a couple other committees. This is second term. I've served on the Joint Finance Committee, which is our budget writing committee in Wisconsin. I also serve as a member of 3 other committees. One of them is named the Mental Health, Substance Abuse Prevention, Children and Families Committee. The next one is the Universities and Revenue Committee. And then I also serve on the State Building Commission. And as I mentioned in my handout, in the Senate, we do have nominees from the governor for cabinet positions for boards and commissions that get assigned to relevant committees. I have that come before my committee, both the governor's nominations for both the Agriculture Committee, Agriculture, which is DATCAP, Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, and we passed him out of committee, and he was confirmed by the Senate. So Randy Romansky returns as the secretary for DATCAP. The other one is the Department of Tourism. She was also passed out of the committee and passed by the Senate. So Ann Sayers is the Department of Tourism secretary, and in order to make sure that we have communication, since those are 2 agencies that I am most connected with, I have monthly Zoom meetings with both of those secretaries, sometimes more often if needed, or depending on scheduling. But make sure that we have, we know what's happening, both on the department side and on the legislative side. I mentioned here that as a member of the State Building Commission, the state budget this year enumerated projects worth $2.3 billion. We also paid down some borrowing from previous bienniums, and we used $1.2 billion in cash out of the surplus to pay for projects that were enumerated, so saving tens of thousands, if not $100 million in interest charges over the future years. The most fun building commission was last week, Wednesday. We met at the Wisconsin State Fair. And so, as I mentioned here, there are about $340 million in building projects that were approved to move forward. Some of them were from this year, some were from prior years. The most interesting one is there's a renovation of the Cream Puff Pavilion that's going to be going on, which is a little over $12 million, but half of that is money from the state. Half of that was gifts, mostly from the dairy industry, to take care of that one. There's a couple projects that have languished on the UW-Madison campus that were in the process of getting done, but the scope changed a little bit and a couple of things changed. So we had to add a little extra money to the vet science building and to the chemistry building, because they are almost done, but they needed a little bit more money to finish some of the things that they were doing. It was, what was explained to me is one of the professors in the chemistry department got another grant, and so they needed to upgrade one of the biohazard labs to accommodate the work that he was going to be doing. So things that takes, 6 years or so. Shared revenue was probably the big thing that happened in the state budget this year, and that is where a bunch of the surplus went in coming up with a new formula, doing a catch-up for all our local cities, towns, villages, and counties to do a little catch-up for them, and then in the future use the 2 cents out of the 5 cents of every dollar that the state collects in sales tax that will be the next funder for the and those folks know that sometimes the sales tax revenues go up. Occasionally, rarely, but occasionally they go down, and they have accepted that the upside is a whole lot better than the downside. So they've accepted that future changes will be based on the increase in sales tax that comes into the state of Wisconsin. That bill was negotiated between the Wisconsin Towns Association, the League of Municipalities, the Wisconsin Counties Association, the governor's office, and a few legislative leaders and a couple legislators that worked on that particular project. So that bill actually was signed into law before the budget was finished, and then the money update was done in the budget, but the bill was signed actually before that happened. Relative to our neck of the woods, the town of Ripon will see a 160% increase in shared revenue. The city will see a 24.4%. The baseline for cities other than Milwaukee was 20%, and an increase for Fond du Lac County of 80.5%. On the backside, I talk a little bit about legislation. So every year, every 2-year session, in Wisconsin, we don't do our legislation on our bills like they do in the federal government. Every session, everything starts off with a clean slate. It's not like the federal government where they keep working on it year after year after year. So starting in January 3rd of this year is when new legislative initiatives can come forward. So far this year, I've had 2 bills that have been signed into law. One was done in cooperation with the tourism department to get rid of some obsolete language. The second one had to do with clarifying who can be on the county conservation land committees, and that was because necessary because of a change in federal law, so we had to make that change. A couple things that I'm working on right now, among others. One is a veterans bill. The district now includes Waupaca County, which means it includes the King Veterans process, meeting with the administrators up there. And one of the things that they're struggling with is there are other options for veterans, and so there is declining in the veterans homes. We have 3 state veterans homes, King up in Waupaca County, one at Chippewa Falls, and then also the one that you've heard about that maybe has had a little more issues is down in the southeast part of the state. Well, one of the things that was pointed out to me is veterans, spouses can also be eligible to reside at those veterans homes. But the veteran has to be housed there before the spouse can be housed there. And so what they told me happens is maybe the veteran's spouse is in need of that care before the veteran. So they're not eligible until the veteran's there. So what happens then in some cases is the veteran will feign that he needs those accommodations, move in, his spouse will then, his or her spouse will then move in, and then the veteran is better and will move out, but then the spouse can stay. So what we're trying to do is say that's a lot of rigmarole for no good reason if that veteran spouse is truly eligible. So we're trying to work with the department to see if we can't get rid of that red tape, so veterans and their spouses can be taken care of appropriately. The other thing that has been really big that we did in the budget, we increased our child protective services. In Wisconsin, every county has their own responsibility for child protective services. This is the kids that are going into foster care or some other care, except for Milwaukee, because was it 30 years ago, 40 years ago already? Milwaukee County was sued because they were not appropriately taking care of kids. And so the state of Wisconsin took over the responsibility for Milwaukee County. So 71 counties plus the state, which covers Milwaukee County. So we increased the reimbursement for those who are doing, stepping up to do foster care, and trying to work hard to get adoptive services, I don't know, more streamlined, but that has to be balanced with the right of parents. So that is a struggle. But something that is appropriate and really happening, especially for older kids who are looking for foster homes, is what they call like kin. Now, you're all probably very aware that many times if there's a situation in a family, maybe grandma and grandpa end up taking the kids in, or maybe an aunt or some other family member. And there's a very robust system of searching out family members to find a place for kids. But there is a system that we'd like to get done in Wisconsin that's called like kin. So what happens, especially with older kids, maybe they have a relationship with a coach or a minister or some neighbor or someone who is not an actual family member, but to that particular young person, to them, it's like being in family. I know my sister, unofficially, but my sister, as her son was finishing high school last year, he had a buddy that spent most of his senior year with my sister and her family, just because it was a better situation and it all worked out great. But this would be a formal way of having like kin become that foster parent. We need to have some legislative authority to be able to make those payments for those foster families. So that is something that I'm working on. I met with the Department of Children and Families Secretary yesterday morning. They're very excited to try to get this done through the legislature, and I'm very hopeful that that is indeed going to happen. So I wanted to mention that as I mentioned just a minute ago, I do a weekly e-update. It's not all hard charging types of things. Sometimes they'll tell you about what's happening overall. Sometimes they'll just talk about what I'm doing when it comes to some of these legislative packages. It has a calendar of events. So I'll put down on that who's having a festival, where the county fairs are, who's having the dairy breakfast, that kind of thing. But I also, since I've been on joint finance, I've done a budget bulletin, which is also on my official website. So you can, if you really want to see in depth what was happening as we were going through the budget. And as always, we do legislative citations for all kinds of things, 50th anniversaries of businesses and Eagle Scouts and all those kinds of things. And we have a team that is very good at doing agency casework. So many times there's DNR issues, sometimes it's unemployment issues. There are a lot of things that pop up that people don't know where to ask the question or who to see. And so many times we can send folks down the right path. A lot of the questions we get are of a federal nature, and so we contact the local congressman. This particular district has a little piece of 4 different congressional districts. So we have all the numbers, so we can match people up. So anyway, there's more I can talk about, but I think that's kind of the thumbnail sketch of what's been happening the first couple of months of the year, and a couple of things I'm going to be working on. And I'd be happy to answer questions moving forward.
Well, we have a few. Andy, you want to see if there are other questions? You might have to, move. The first question is a question that many of us are curious about, and it occurred, I think, simultaneously with the shared revenue bill.
Okay.
And that was, we wanted to know the reason why the state wanted to discontinue advisory resolutions from local municipalities. Because I think that either was with that shared revenue bill or parallel with it.
It was part of shared revenue.
Okay.
And it was one of the items that I was not in any of those negotiations. It was one of the things that was requested of the city and the county of Milwaukee, especially moving forward. So.
Because I guess I mean, they're advisory.
I know.
They're just, I mean, they had no teeth. It was just a barometer. It's a barometer to know how the grassroots are feeling about things.
Yeah, it was one of those things that some folks thought it was important to do, and for whatever reason, that ended up part of the package. As I said, it was negotiated by those groups of people. There wasn't, I don't think there were any changes to the legislation as it moved through the legislature, as it was a agreed to package, between the governor, the legislature, and all the municipal groups.
So then there's a follow-up question. what about, why not have binding referenda? Because the states of Michigan and Ohio use it.
As does California, and, you know, there are others. So it is not part of our Constitution, you know, to do those kinds of referenda in Wisconsin. I believe that is important to have the representative form of government, so that folks send me to Madison to use their voice, you know, speak on their behalf, trying to listen to everybody in the district. What we've seen, the practical point of that is it's very difficult to scope out the details in some of these binding referendum. I've heard from legislators and law enforcement in Colorado, for example. They did binding legislation, referendum, I don't remember or petition, whatever they call it there, to legalize marijuana.
Yep.
And it threw the state into disarray in how to regulate it, how to set it up, how to do these things. So we all know when we see a referendum on the ballot, it can be rather confusing. So if you mean yes, do you really have to vote no? Or if you want no, do you really have to vote yes? It can be very confusing, and the details are not apparent in many cases. So it just doesn't seem like the optimum way to govern.
Okay, well, we have some really good questions here. One is, what are the largest issues facing Wisconsin in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the largest issues probably are unknown as to what's going to happen. We never thought there was going to be COVID, which put our economy in a tailspin. We never thought that our unemployment agency was found to be inept in many ways, you know, to serve the public when it came to that particular issue. I think part of it is we just don't know what's going to happen globally. You know, so when we see the big picture of what's happening in the news, you know, is there going to be, whoever thought that we'd still be talking about Russia and President Putin and what was happening over there for, how long has it been now? Yeah.
They started their second year.
The second year, I was going to say at least 20 months, something like that. And what it's actually done to our agricultural exports and community. Because I deal with the agriculture so heavily, I try to keep very close track of what's happening when it comes to exports, what's happening in the farm economy. And every week, it is no longer just whether it's raining or whether there's a late frost or an early frost. It has to do with what's the soybean crop doing in Brazil, and are the trains running in Argentina, and, you know, is there a port that isn't being able to ship out of the Ukraine? So there are just so many things that we can no longer control, and I'm afraid that some of those global issues that we've not thought about are going to be issues moving forward on the grand scale. On the local scale, on the state scale, we have a good economy, we have good reserves. Aside the state surplus, what's in the checkbook, we have $1.8 billion in our rainy day fund. We have a lot of stable things going on in the state of Wisconsin, which is much better than many other states. In some of the national conventions I go to, one of the number one threats to their revenue and economy is, do they have a stable, which was one of the big problems in Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, because their pension system was not being adequately funded. And in Wisconsin, it's considered, if not the top, one of the top 5. Yeah, there you go. There you go. And everybody is in it. And now with the agreement that was done with Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee, all new hires will be transitioning into the state system. It's paid down, and those legacy employees go through their current pension system.
Okay, I have several questions here on child care. I'm going to start with one that, how is foster care initiated right now? And are there siblings that are grouped together?
So first of all, I think the last number I saw is maybe 8,000 of home care. I think that's about right. I don't know off the top how much that's costing, but
because those are typically county expenses.
Your county is paying for that, with being subsidized by the state. So exactly how much it is, it depends on your particular county. Now, individuals, one of the things we saw during COVID, there were less referrals to county child protective services, because most of those school, because teachers are mandatory reporters. So without the kids being in school, there were a lot of things that were maybe missed or not brought forward, unfortunately. There is an entire system with your county, except, like I said, in Milwaukee County, the state runs it, who is responsible for doing intake on any of those reports. Timeline for having to investigate those reports. Sometimes they say they are screened out, which means there isn't enough substantiation, to do something. It's something like 70% of all kids that go into child protective services are because of neglect. It's not because of abuse. Times neglect means there isn't adequate care, adequate food, all those kinds of things. And one of the reasons we've seen a major uptick, it was coming down, but uptick now is because of the situation with drugs. Because I've heard from law enforcement folks that say, they get a call to go and pick up some kids because mom and dad drove someplace and left the 2- and 4-year-old at home alone because they were going to get there buy drugs. So this is a terrible situation, and we need volunteers. You see the billboards all over the place. Foster care parents rock, kind of thing. So we're looking for foster parents. But those are for the young people that you're not finding family members that are able to take those kids. There is a very robust system of licensure for foster parents. If the case, in many cases, that a family member ends up fostering youngsters, they can go to that home, but those family members do have to go through a licensure process also. They do have to go through that training also. I also serve on the Child Neglect Abuse Prevention Board. And so what we do, there's a license plate, the Celebrate Children license plate. So some of that money goes to the Prevention Board, the Prevention Foundation, for the work they do. $1 out of every birth certificate actually goes to the Prevention Board to subsidize their work. And there's also state money that goes into that. But they have a small budget, I think they're 8 or 12 staff. But what they're trying to do is find emerging and evidence-based programs that can help our counties and our cities who are working in this area, what's working and what then we can get behind to scale up that the Department of Children and Families can do on a larger basis. So it's anywhere from home visiting, could be doula services, could be family resource centers, a lot of things that individual communities and counties have done and tried, to see what is going to work for them. The goal is not to have children taken out of the home. The goal is to try to help a family stay together. And if that means, many times that means that a family needs to work together through counseling, just because my view of neglect may not be the ultimate most important view of what neglect is, because everybody runs their household differently. So we have to be aware of those kinds of things also. But anyway, so it's a system where someone notices something, someone says something, it's reported to the county takes that referral in and investigates it. And unfortunately, the counties are not perfect. We still have incidents that happen, even though those county folks are trained and working to the best of their ability. We still have tragedies that happen, and there are reports that the department has to provide to the legislature. We have at least one meeting a year in one of the committees I'm on that has children and families, and we review those reports, and they're terrible. And many times, sometimes they've been reported and the issue has been screened out, so there hasn't been follow-up, and then something else tragically happens. So anyway.
And this follow-up question is that this person was reading that approximately 80 children in foster care, and I think they mean annually, die while living with foster parents.
That I'm not aware of.
And where in the...
I don't think it's that high, but
You don't think it's that high?
It does happen.
And we've had a couple, at least in Fond du Lac County, that had been placed in Milwaukee, had actually died while I was working at Fond du Lac County. Kids not in foster care average 8 years. Is this something that needs additional oversight?
Kids in foster care?
Yeah.
That is...
Who asked the question?
Kids not in foster care are more, no, this is just what I'm remembering, but it was a much higher number for those in foster care time than those that were on their own of the same age group. And something like eight per year or something like that of this age group average died per year.
Okay.
That were not in foster care. The kids that were in foster care had a ridiculously higher number.
Okay.
Of deaths.
I'd have to check. I don't recall that's the case. I think, but what you were reading, what you thought the question was, I believe the average for kids in foster care now is like 2.5 years, but the younger the child, the sooner they are adopted. It's the older kids that are not adopted later in life. We actually, a little bit older, we actually have, one of my stops today, I actually had a tour of Rawhide, up in New London. And, they're doing wonderful work, but they have residential young men there, but they are doing so much more with local school districts.
Well, there's one in Fond du Lac now.
Yep, and they are working with a lot of local school districts. And actually, the one in Fond du Lac is equestrian therapy.
Yeah, there is a lot of opportunity for that in
Yeah.
Fond du Lac. I just saw the new building off of County Trunk M the other day.
I was told about that today.
Really nice facility.
So they have a lot of horses up there too, and I said, when I came up here, I thought I'd see a lot of cars. So they said, okay, we'll take you back to the, back to the lot and show you where the cars and the boats are. And they said, we even had 2 airplanes donated last year. So, but they wholesale most everything as part of their revenue sources, but they're always looking for donations also because they do a lot of work and they lose money doing it. So they need donations too.
This question is, do you support Megan Wolf to continue on at the Wisconsin Election Commission?
That's a very interesting question right now, because we would expect that the commission would have moved her forward for nomination because her term is up. And I think this is going to end up possibly go through the courts, whether she is eligible to stay there or not. I know we've taken action in the Senate to say that no, she is in fact, by the action of the commission with 3 votes for and 3 abstentions. That means that the commission has moved her forward to the Senate. So at this point, that happened on our last day in the Senate. So she has not reached out to anyone to start interview process.
Oh, are they supposed to then interview with senators?
Yes.
Is this the same thing for like the Secretary of Transportation?
Yes.
And he's never been confirmed, correct?
He has, what's his name?
I know it.
I know too. He's a nice guy.
He's a great guy.
So he, all of those agencies and boards and,
Craig Thompson.
Craig Thompson, yes. And all those secretaries, yes. So they get referred to a committee, just like a bill. And so if they're interested, they contact the members of the committee and ask for an interview. And they come in and, give their background, tell you why they, should be good at doing this. Maybe they did last time. Why they are prepared to do this, what they want to do moving forward. Then it goes to a public hearing in a committee. And then the committee chair can choose to vote on it or not. And then the Senate leadership can choose to put it on the agenda. So that's why I mentioned the 2 secretaries that came to my committee. They did that. Not only did they talk to the members of the committee, they worked hard to get around to all 33 senators so that they were all familiar with them. It's an interview. It's a big interview process, right? And they were passed out of my committee with an executive vote, and then they were put on the floor for a full vote last spring. And so they became the official secretaries for their departments, and it works for every department. Now, on to Megan Wolf. I don't know, I don't serve on the elections committee in the Senate, and I haven't looked. I presume that's been moved to that committee, I don't know. But I do know that, I believe Ms. Wolf believes that she doesn't need to go through the process. I don't know at this point. We haven't, I've only know what I've seen in the press that everybody else has seen in the press regarding what some of the folks on the Elections Commission said should be the case. So I know it's been compared to a couple of the folks that overstayed their terms, you know, at the end of last year.
That's typical, isn't it, that they stay beyond their terms until?
Well, it's interesting. So if your term ended tomorrow, the governor might not send a nominee until
Right.
the day after.
Right.
You know, so if you're willing, normally that person stays on until the next one goes through this whole process as a confirm.
So here's a follow-up question. Is this why Fred Preen has been allowed to stay on the DNR board past the date of his term?
Yes.
Yeah, that would,
Yep.
there's got to be a consistency in administration.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right, I have a different, we're going to move on to a different topic.
Okay.
And you're finished with the Megan Wolf stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay. What are your thoughts on how to speed up the implementation of rural broadband?
We have more money than we can spend. So
I've never heard anybody in government say that.
there is more money out there than we can spend. What our holdup right now is there aren't enough contractors and there aren't enough supplies to get things going.
Oh, it's a supplied side?
It's both. There is a really good small rural telephone company, the Marquette Adams Company, that's over in Oxford. And in talking to their former CEO who just retired, they were successful in getting 6 out of the 7 grant applications that they did. And there's another new round of them coming up now. And they said, we can't even go after anymore right now because we've got to finish what we already have. I mean, there is lots of money out there. It has to do with the contracting and the supplies to be able to do this. They've been, there's been cable company in Marquezan all summer just working on 3 streets.
Are they burying cable?
They're burying cable.
Because they're doing that here in Ripon, too.
Yeah, they're burying cable. So, yes, there are billions of dollars that are out there. And actually, one of the bills that we're hearing in our committee, I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or if it's next week Wednesday, there is one that's out there. And the concern is that some of this money has been going to upgrade places that already have adequate service. And the harder it is to get to places, it's going to be longer to get to. So, and trying to get the Public Service Commission to consider that when they're doing their grants, you know, to make sure that there's service getting out throughout the entire state. You know, so I think it's going to be a while until, if you look at the heat map of where it is, it's still going to be a problem in northern Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. The other problem is the maps that they currently provide to us from the federal communications is done by census block. So that means that it's not granular enough to know that if this street has great broadband and this street doesn't, it's all part of the same census block. So it shows that they all have broadband, right? So part of it is just trying to find the right places to put it also. And that is something that the federal government is supposed to be, we were talking about this in the last budget, was supposed to be getting to us, 2.5 years ago. So hopefully it's getting close.
Okay. We're going to switch gears again.
Sure.
This question is, what about the governor's proposal supporting child care? There seems to be a lot of chatter, even locally, about child care. So what do you think about that proposal that the governor has done?
Well, you have to remember that the $300 million that the governor put into childcare over about 2.5 years was COVID money. You know, it was money that came through the CARES Act or one of the other federal programs that the governor had money for. And the purpose of that was because there were a lot of people who were not working, so the kids weren't going to the daycares, and the daycares were closing, and a lot of their workers were choosing not to go over COVID. And so the whole idea was, let's support these businesses so that when we open up again, they're still going to be there. We're past COVID. Inflation has gone up. The cost of that daycare has gone up. Those were never highly paid workers in the first place. A lot of times that, they were part-time, they weren't getting any kind of benefits. And we have a high need of workers with sub 3% unemployment. So some of those workers, because of everything that happened, have decided not to work. Some of them have found other things to do, and it's costing more and more. So putting more money into the system I don't think is the answer. One of the things that I think is the answer is our employers, just like they offer health care benefits, or if you're in the big city, maybe you have parking benefits or mass transit benefits, or all kinds of things. You have retirement benefits. One of the things that I think our employers need to do, and they are in many areas, they need to consider that their younger workers that are trying to grow their families get in the game. We have some employers that are partnering with existing daycare facilities and basically buying slots or subsidizing slots so that those daycares can be open and their employees can get there. We had an example in Watertown where YMCA partnered, actually was going out and talking to all the businesses in their community to get them to support, to do the same thing. I think there needs to be it needs to be more of a partnership. Now, one of the programs that the governor did have through his CARES Act money was called Partner Program. And the Partner Program had employees, and someone who had their child in daycare, they paid a quarter of the cost, and the state picked up 75%. So there are samples of programs out there. There's one that I've been looking at that's a third paid by the parents, a third paid by the employer, and a third paid by the state. So I think that might be a more reasonable way to get employers involved in this kind of program. But we're also looking at, and this is another thing I was talking with the Department of Children and Families secretary about yesterday. We have a program, and you have to have a quality assurance program to be able to be eligible for federal funds. And in Wisconsin, it's called Young Star. And so for anyone who has kids in daycare right now, you can look to see what the rating is of the location that you're considering or going to be taking your youngster to. And the consideration by both the providers, the department, I would say, and many in the legislature think it is, it's too tied to certain objective type of criteria, whether there is a certain level of education for the folks that are doing the service, whether there is a certain level of square footage to be able to do this or to do that. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be quality. I mean, they still have to be safe. They still have to have proper ratios of adults and supervised folks to the young, to the youngsters, that kind of thing. But there are some things that I think we're all thinking we could do a better job and be less burdensome on those daycare providers that would be more relevant to taking better care of kids. Now, we've got a very different system here. Some of you know one of my daughters lives in Switzerland. She has a 5-year-old, and he's in kindergarten 2 now. Started school on Monday. But he's going to, has gone to daycare and still goes to daycare part-time. And when I was visiting last fall, I'd have to walk him to school and pick him up and daycare and had to move him from kindergarten to daycare and all that kind of thing. They don't have the physical structures that we consider the way things need to be. They have school, and then they walk down the block to the playground. So they don't have a enclosed playground, for the kids out the back door. They walk down the street to the playground. They get on the tram and go out to the forest one day a week. I mean, there are very different kinds of things, and I think we need to be a little more open to some of the models that maybe we have built up facilities to a point where they're the standard versus the care and the education side of things. But that's more of a philosophical idea. But I'm working with the department on can we come up with a better model for Youngstar. And then the last thing I would mention, we do have a shares program. So depending on your income level, you could be eligible for a subsidy for your child care. One of the caveats is if you're sending your youngster to a higher star program, you get a little more money that goes towards that, but it doesn't quite match up either. So, do we need to keep that connection in helping to subsidize families through that? We subsidize folks that are at 185% of federal poverty limit, and then for every $5 over that limit, there is a change in the reimbursement by $1. We changed that in the last budget. We raised the rates, and we had less of a penalty if you were making more money. So we reduced that gap. I'd like to see it reduced more, but at least we reduced it some.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions, and then we can wrap it up. Now, this is a big question.
Okay.
So, and I've kind of edited it a little bit. So, I think it was just the other day, 2 false electors from Wisconsin were indicted in Georgia.
Okay.
They were. So, the question is really, do you support the use of false electors as a contingency in the next presidential election, or should both parties prepare electoral college reps independent of the popular vote?
Well, what I know about that is what I've heard in the news also. And so I didn't know about, Georgia indicted some Wisconsinites.
That's interesting.
The explanation I've heard is it was still in the courts. Could it be changed? I don't know. I was never approached, so I have no idea. I have no firsthand knowledge of what the reasoning was in doing that. I know it has happened in the past. I've heard in the news reports now that it actually happened was it 68 in Hawaii, something like that, where there was an alternate set of electors also done, and then it actually switched, and so that alternate group ended up being the ones.
68 was a very turbulent year.
It was a long, I'm thinking, I heard this on the radio, but it's, there was some precedent to it, but, like you say, it has been turbulent.
Yes, yeah. Okay, the final question I'm going to need some help with. Who asked the question on baseball? Cal, I don't understand the question. I understand because it says, what is the legislator going to do able American Family Field?
Right, so the governor put in his budget $290 million to help the Brewers through renovations moving forward. He also had, that's what you're talking about? He also had in his budget that if that would happen, the Brewers would extend their lease for a few years, like 8 years or something like that.
Okay.
So and the governor suggested that we use that $290 million in cash. So we took it out of the budget, and there are several legislators that are still working on that proposal with the Brewers. So we compare it to, same thing that happened with Pfizer Forum. So you might have heard the phrase, it's cheaper to keep them. People don't realize when that big, high-paid superstar baseball player or basketball player or football player comes and plays in Wisconsin, the portion that they were paid for that game, they pay taxes to Wisconsin. So there is a lot of revenue that comes by having an NBA team, an FL team, an NBA team, and actually the way the Brewers' salary schedule is, we're better off having the bigger teams come because they pay more money than we do. But anyway, that aside, so there is a good chunk of change that going long-term, we're saying, this is money that the state can invest for in the Brewers that is going to pay back. And even if the state is out of supposedly that revenue because of income tax, there's still the overall economic benefit to the community.
Yeah, but the state also collects sales tax,
right,
which is huge when you have all these visitors to the state or to Milwaukee or to Green Bay. So the state's revenue isn't a single revenue source of income. There are other sources of revenue that are generated by these athletic teams.
That is true. And one of the things that I pointed out to some of my colleagues, the Brewers have their training facility down in Arizona, and they put $80 million into that. So they have also contributed in other areas. So it's okay if the Brewers have to put some skin in the game. One of the suggestions that we had, that we did the same thing with the Pfizer Forum, is have a seat tax, so that people who are actually going to the facility, whether it was for a concert or a game or whatever it was, that there's a little add-on that goes into the kitty to help pay for all of this. Because if you or I never go to a Brewers game, somebody who's going down and doing that all the time, it's okay if they pay a little bit more than you or I do if we're not going to one of those games. But there's a big thing, and a couple things I'm going to tell you that's kind of related to that same thing and what happens with all of this. So in the budget, we provided $2 million to the Green Bay Convention and Visitors Bureau that they will use toward the NFL draft that's coming in 2025. And I had the opportunity, along with a lot of other people, to go to a presentation Monday morning with NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. And what they talked about was, in many ways, this will be an advertisement for Wisconsin. It's going to be it's going to be a $20 billion economic impact to the Green Bay area. It's going to be a $94 billion economic impact to Wisconsin. And there's going to be nearly 70 million people that will watch the NFL draft at some point to see Wisconsin. So that's a good thing. The other thing that you might not have seen, for all you foodies in the office, in the room, right now on the ground in Wisconsin, there is. Now I'm not gonna have the name of it on my tongue. There's a food contest.
Yep, competition, where there's a chef from,
There's the chef.
is from Wisconsin.
Well, there's a big chef show.
Yeah.
That they do. What is that called?
Top Chef.
Top Chef. Top Chef is filming in Wisconsin right now. It's going to be approximately 16 episodes that will probably come out in February or March. But in talking with Tourism Secretary Sayers yesterday, depending on how the writer's strike goes, it might come out sooner. Than that, because, they're looking for the reality shows. So that cost, Wisconsin had to contribute about $100,000 to get them to come to Wisconsin, but they're going to be all over the place. I just saw on Twitter earlier today, 2 restaurants that they were in, filming in Milwaukee as we speak. And we were told that they'll be in the state about 6 weeks to do all these shows. But anytime you get any of that kind of thing in, it provides an economic impact for the state, because people want to see that restaurant, see that location, get the good vibes of whatever it is. So these are all opportunities that we're trying to promote through the Department of Tourism, through the Department of Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. So it's not just about giving companies money when they say they're going to bring some jobs. It's about how do you bring more people in, and how do you kind of showcase what's happening also. So those are a couple good vibe things that that came out of the budget too. That it's not the big dollar amounts, but they could have a very big impact going down the road. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator Ballweg, so much. Well, I was talking to somebody and they thought I said Joan Ballweg, and they thought I said Tammy Baldwin. I went, no, we wouldn't have her. She's announced she's running for office, and we don't do that.
Oh, well, that's true too. That's true too. So.
Thank you so much. You did a lot of work here for us. It was supposed to be a 3-person panel.
Well, that's okay.
We appreciate it.
I would happy to answer your questions anytime.
And Our next event is September 13th, in which we talk about local government. We're finding that folks don't understand government real well, so thank you for
You bet.
representing the state for us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.